Hey everyone, Valerie Smith here, a acupuncturist, Chinese medicine educator, and TCM women's wellness mentor. I work particularly with women moving through midlife to help them kind of lose the labels that they have attached to them that perhaps no longer serve them, and to really get back in touch with their adventurous, curious side. So, today's live, what I'm really drawn to talk about is the power of self-reflection in strengthening community. Now, I work with, as I mentioned, women moving through midlife, and a lot of the work we do is self-reflection. What labels do you carry with you that um, describe you that may have served a purpose at one time, may have been partly for survival, may have fit you beautifully, but no longer fit you? And so self reflection is really an important piece to that puzzle. And over the last few weeks and months, and particularly with the mass shooting in Atlanta, really started to think on that a little bit more from the perspective of self reflection in the labels we use to think about other people, to describe other people, to behave toward other people, that kind of define our behavior toward other people who may be different than us, right? And I hope that most women in my age group, and being a white woman, very aware of Karen and how to move away from that, how to not reinforce that stereotype. So we grow up with all these models around us. We grow up with all these terms to describe people who may not look like us. And in particularly, most recently with the Asian hate crimes rising and the slaughter in Atlanta, as well as the more prominence brought forward in Black Lives Matter and the killings and bias and um, discrimination and prejudice toward people of color in general. It leads me to think, how did we get here? Where did we come? Where did we go so that we are here? And certainly when I say here, we've been at this place for 100 years, 200 years. It's just manifesting more prominently now. And part of it, I believe, is that historically, people somehow need to think they're better off than the next person. Like we put our value on, who am I better than? And so we assign these labels to groups of people, and the label can be anything, um, that make them less than, and allow us to treat others differently. And when I say allow us to treat others differently, it's well, I've got to keep my eye, if I'm working at a store, I got to keep my eye on the person of color because they might shoplift. Well, I mean, the reality is that's BS, right? That's not true. Um, that is just statistically not true. But where do these ideas come from, and how we use them to promote discrimination, to promote prejudice, to promote bias, sometimes without even realizing what we're doing. It's so ingrained in us, and these labels are part of the fabric of our country, right? It's how most of us grew up. So it may be labels of this person might steal, this person might be violent, I'm afraid of this person. Whatever, these are some common um, things that might be said. And one of the most powerful ways we can change that is self-reflection. Like, why did I just, why is this coming up? Why do I think this way? Be curious about why we would think a certain way or behave a certain way or assume certain things of another race. Why? Can we be curious and investigate? And can we move to a point of understanding that if we grow up in a country where racism is part of the fabric of our founding and our growth, then how can we not, as white people, be racist? How can we not be racist? So many conversations, the most recent, The View or The Talk, uh, one of the one of the panel was called out for saying something racist, and her immediate response was defensive. I am not. How can you say this? Well, yeah, let's just acknowledge it so we can talk about it, so that we can reflect on why I think this way that may have no bearing on reality. That why can't we be curious about this? If we think more about being curious and being self-reflective instead of defensive and angry and combative, then we can perhaps start to move forward in community as opposed to um, separately. We need to acknowledge our roles, and we need to, and that can be one of the best ways to be supportive, is to acknowledge. When we acknowledge, we leave room for conversations. They're uncomfortable. Certainly, I don't like to think that I'm racist. I don't like to think that, but certainly there are things that I likely do that are racist in nature. I may say something that was quite fine to say in the 60s when I grew up in my community. And I need to be curious and self-reflective, about, okay, maybe this doesn't work. Maybe it's really hurtful for people. So why would I even say something that is that hurtful to someone? And be curious as to either where that arose or why it was okay, right? It's so important that we, particularly as white people, take down some of our barriers so that we can have the important conversations um, without alienating those closest to us. And um, so many people I hear say, well, this is an example in my high school Facebook page, and the people from graduated from the 40s, probably not the 40s, those people might not be around still, but say 50s, 60s, all the way to the present. And definitely the older generation is saying, someone said there's a problem we need to address here. And the older generation would say, hand to God, there was never any racism, there was never any discrimination in my class. We all get along. We were all really good to people who didn't look like us. Well, maybe there was one black girl in the class, and I doubt that anybody actually asked her experience in the larger context. So, um, these are my deep thoughts, and I just want to close with, if we can acknowledge our role, no matter how uncomfortable it, and defensive it makes us feel. If we can acknowledge our role in perpetuating racism, whether it's anti-Asian, anti-black, anti-person of color in general, anti-LGBTQ plus, if we can start to acknowledge our responsibility and be curious about our attitudes, where they came from, how they really don't make a whole lot of sense in the larger scheme of things, because ultimately we are all equal. We are all equal. Never plays out that way in society, but let's be more curious. Let's have more discussions. Let's get into the uncomfortable level so it's not, just about me as a white person feeling better because I've had my say. It's about really listening and making change. So, those are my deep thoughts for the day. Self reflection is also self reflection about our thoughts of others, where they came from, how they make us feel when we're thinking about that. Are they really true? Are they really appropriate? Do they really fit? And curiosity through the whole process. Curiosity to learn, like really learn about those around us without our assumptions getting in the way, and creating and strengthening our communities. So I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I will stop back again next Friday.